this footnote, and there's like the sum of it all is very appropriate for today. To explain how this approach, this mentality is the tachlis of what the Alter Rebbe Chabad, what he wanted to be mechadesh and Chabad Chassidus. So we'll just say the last structure we said about this whole topic we've been studying is another example. Before we start, Nishma or Nishma V'Naseh. Nishma what today the mental Judaism is Naseh V'Nishma. La'atid Lavo, the Tachlis is to flip the order, where the MS on the Mashiach comes, or the perfection of the service of Hashem, or the ideal of what Hashem created the world for is to reach the opposite mentality, which is not Nishma V'Naseh. First I understand, I listen, I hear. And from all of my doing, or my heart, my emotion, my willingness, my devotion to Hashem is a result of understanding. Now again, like we mentioned every time, that seemingly the foundation of all Judaism is the exact opposite. That first you have to devote to yourself. Naseh, then Bezrat Hashem Nishma, then the understanding will settle in Bezrat Hashem. But the devotion, the Kabbalat all is the foundation. And we've been going on here. That's the.
I think that like my grandparents, when they came to America, there was all Naseh. They didn't know why they were supposed to do this. There was some superstition, there was a lot of this and that. And they just dropped it because there was no.
Okay, so then even though again it's not just your grandparents, it's like 3,000 years of Judaism, or at the very least leading. We could make the simple, like, could say to that, one of the answers is that Naseh V'Nishma doesn't mean no Nishma. It doesn't say not to understand. It's just a question of what precedes what. So that would be like a simple question, a simple answer. But the deeper answer is that we'd agree that in our generation, this is why Chassidus in general, and the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus specifically, was so necessary in these generations to bring about this era, and that people feel today a need for more understanding and more depth is, again, it could definitely, if at the end the person brings a Jew to Chas v'Shalom, leave Judaism, so for sure it's not a good thing. But like everything bad, it's reflecting something true in depth, and like the core of this demand is something very true. That like that's what we're explaining here. That even though Naseh V'Nishma is such a foundation of Judaism, it's also something. It's not the purpose of creation. It's just like a stage, a necessary, very important, wholly necessary stage. But it's just a stage where the Bem is the Tachlis, like where Hashem is leading us to is the opposite. But as we explained every time, the second Nishma V'Naseh, there are three. So the summary of what we studied up until now is that what comes of it is there are actually three ways of phrasing what precedes what. The first, bad nature, is also where a person, through a bad insistence on his ego and assumption of self-righteousness, insists on first understanding everything, and only then he's willing to commit. And that's not good. So that needs to be broken. A person needs to sever that foreskin, to realize that he's not perfect, and even if he doesn't understand, he needs to devote himself to Hashem blindly. And then after that, Bezrat Hashem will merit also understanding. So that's like a simple view of Yiddishkeit. So that's a second mentality. The first nature, the idiom we use is what Chazal say in the giving of the Torah. So Hashem went from, and this is the pshat of Naseh V'Nishma and Chazal, that Hashem went to all the goyim and he offered them the Torah, and they all said, no, we don't want the Torah. Or first they asked, what does it say in the Torah? And they met because whoever asks, if that's your mental state, that your self-righteousness is so strong, then also for sure you're going to find the problem. And that's what Chazal say, that every one of the goyim, first they asked, what does it say? And after they read it all, then they found the flaw. Because if you come from such a place, that first of all, my assumption is that my moral stature, my opinions, first of all, for sure I'm right. And let's see if the Torah works with that. Then for sure you'll find mistakes. You'll make mistakes. That's what happened. And the merit of the Jewish people, as our sages say, is that when Hashem offered the Torah to us, that we didn't even ask. Whatever it is, we'll take it. So the second mentality is Nasa v'Nishma.
Oh, okay.
Like there's a seminal Nishma v'Nasa, which is bad. And the rectification of that is Nasa v'Nishma.
Okay.
But what we're discussing now is that the purpose of all of this is to reach a higher level than that, which is again a second nature. Like we always describe, a second nature is very similar to our first nature, only rectified. So it's again to go back to, it's not to go back, to go forward to something that resembles is the rectification of the seminal first bad mentality, which is again Nishma v'Naseh. That's the tachlis of everything. How do you describe that? What was in order to describe that? So we pinpointed the flaw of Naseh v'Nishma. What's the flaw of Naseh v'Nishma? That it's all leaning on a thin or a background assumption that Hashem's revelation, Hashem's presence is counterintuitive. It's unnatural. It is always in the stead of my opinion. You need to be biblical. That is something Kabbalat all. Like, which is true. Like we're saying now, that this mentality, this second mentality, is necessary in order to rectify a seminal bad mentality. So Be'emet is something, again, it's like any medication. It means you're sick. It's a necessity. It's not lechatchila. Any necessity is it's a must. It's not an ideal. It's just necessity. So this whole beautiful, wonderful mentality that our sages say that the angels' crowns, the two crowns of Chulei, there's something about this entire mentality of Kabbalat Ol that it's inherently, it's essentially a necessity to solve your initial lack of Kabbalat Ol. And what's why lechatchila? Because be'emet it's implied so many times when a person, his whole Yiddishkeit is grasped as Kabbalat Ol, so it's implying Hashem's lack of suitability to reality. That's the opposite of Mashiach. And Mashiach is Dirab Tachtonim, where our level of existence becomes a dwelling place, a natural home for Hashem. And the need to constantly annul myself in front of Hashem and cancel my opinion is reflectant of how my state is not comfortable with Hashem. And therefore my Hashem is dependent on staying myself always. It doesn't naturally with my life. And it's very, very good that you're willing to constantly do that, but it's very bad that you need to do that. The tachlis, what we really want is that Hashem's presence becomes something natural, present in our reality.
You mean when Mashiach comes and we feel fixed? That's the third state you're going
So that's
to?
we want to say it's not only is that what will happen when Mashiach comes, serving Hashem in that way is what Chassidus is all about. And in order to bring Mashiach about, you have to reach that mentality. This is what will be when Mashiach comes, and in order you have to be. It's both sides. This is the cause and the result. Aim, like the Rebbe said many times. Serve Hashem the way it should be serving Mashiach. Okay, so that was in a nutshell what we've been discussing. The next structure he presented, reflecting the same process, is the Vort, the very famous Vort in Chassidus about Isha Yoled Mazrat Chila Yoled Zachar, Ish Yoled Mazrat Chila Yoled Nekeva. That if this is also simply a biological phenomena, but in Chassidus to explain a psychological phenomenon that when a feminine mentality precedes a masculine, so that births a a masculine reality, like result. And when the masculine mentality precedes the feminine mentality, so that births a feminine result. So we'll explain that. That was the last structure we started. Now here, explicitly, again, there's a side. Femininity is good, it's a pro, and there's a side where it's a con. Depends how you look at it. Same thing about masculinity. Referring to the results, so the idiom is that a feminine result is something not stable. Because I'll say this about all the exiles and redemptions. And every time we came back from our exiles, so it was a feminine redemption. Why? Because it birthed another exile. It wasn't eternal.
Can you say that again? When a feminine mentality precedes a masculine mentality, then
The word in Chazal is that Isha Mazrat Chila, that if the feminine side precedes, and then only then the masculine side enters. So that will birth a masculine result. And if it's the opposite, then the opposite. Now, each one of these phrases need to be understood. What is it implying? What is it referring to? Okay, so in the process stage, we'll start with the process stage.
What does that mean, process?
If you precede femininity to masculinity, then what is that? What is femininity? What's masculine? Feminine is relatively, Hashem is masculine. Like he's the mashpia. He's our husband, and we're his wife. Exactly. So it's like Hitaruta del Tata and Hitaruta del Leila. It's like if my awakening to serve Hashem begins from my effort, that's called femininity, from the bottom. Like if I approach, if I reap, and then Hashem bestows upon me, then what He bestows, if I prepared myself correctly, that's the femininity. Then what Hashem, the masculine side, bestows on me, it will catch, it'll stick.
And be masculine?
And then so in the result, that's called masculine. Masculine means it doesn't impregnate. Okay, that was the word. Again, that's why I said that the original idiom in Chazal has to do with exile. Like when we came back from Babylon, or when we came out of Egypt, it was all a feminine redemption. Why was it a feminine redemption? Because it wasn't eternal. It gave birth to another exile. We didn't stay in redemption. So here, the birthing is a con. It's a bad thing because it's not eternal. It's not stable. So that the exile from Egypt could birth another exile. So that's a bad thing. And whereas the coming redemption, the final redemption, so it's considered a masculine redemption because it doesn't birth anything. It's eternal, stable, stays stationary.
If the male precedes the female, the feminine, then it births a feminine.
Yeah.
And that's positive.
No, that's negative.
Well, that's the negative.
Yeah, I guess. So that's why I said it's a bit tricky because the feminine entity is good. It's implying something positive in the process and something negative in the result. That's what we need to work out. Again, more. Femininity represents two things in this idiom. It represents, on the one hand, itaruta del tata, like you said. So femininity is the receiver, the receptive side, preparing itself. So the first idiom of femininity is like we said just now, that let's give a simple example. If I come to learn Chassidus, and I scrutinize myself very much, I prepare myself very much, and I build my vessels very well before I come to learn. So that's called, that would be a feminine process. So if the preparation of the receiver precedes the bestowing of the giver, so then it settles well. It has a vessel to settle in. See, he doesn't do that to me because he knows I don't like it. That's not true. I like it, but she probably senses my.
You're the alpha.
That's
Gave me the
something.
warmest welcome.
Like it when she just walked away.
We would have embraced you too if you came in at the beginning.
I can live with again. So, like in any preparation, if the receiver's preparation precedes the giving, so then the giving sits well. So that's obviously a good thing. So the feminine entity preceding the masculine entity in the process is always resembling of something good. That's how it should be. First, you should prepare yourself, and then what you receive, like first you need to reap the ground, and then when the rain comes, then it settles well. It can enter bipnimius. Whereas if the process is different, you come to a class and somebody impresses you very much, and your willingness is a result of what you received. It's not that you first prepared yourself to receive. Someone gave you, like, you came to a class somehow, some friend brought you over, and you heard a class and you were very impressed by the class. And that impression, that's what caused you to be willing to work. So your work from the bottom is a result of the masculine side. First there's a mashpia, and then the mikabel works. So it says that sort of work, like what you get that way, it's not stable. Like you go to Yutat Kislev, or one of these performances they have now, and you go there, and then it's such a big light, and you're so excited that you come out with a lot of motivation. So it says that sort of motivation is a non-stable motivation. Why? Because your willingness to work hard is a result of what you received. And a stable motivation is the opposite, is where first your willingness comes, you work hard, and then you receive. And then what you receive, it becomes yours. You purchase it.
And your first initial introduction to.
Okay, so we say that very often, says that Chassidus as well. That's very true, what we said. Actually, there's Mamash Bashgachat Pati today, they printed a pamphlet. So I wrote one of the things in that pamphlet. That's exactly the topic we wrote about. That even though, like, the main vort, one of the most basic vorts of Chassidus, of Torah, and especially in Chabad, is that everything needs to be done the way I'm describing now. That there has to be like a settled preparation, and then things can be. You have to study at length and come with a lot of willingness in order for the Torah to impregnate you, to be able to enter you correctly and to breathe something. But with all that being the case, in order to step in, there has to be an initial makif. There has to be some like makif. Okay, but that's exactly what we're saying. That the initial redemption, like Matan Torah, was like a big makif. But because it was so exalted and from above, and we were so not prepared, so Be'emet it didn't last. It fell apart very quickly. So the motivation, you find yourself motivated because of what was bestowed on you. That's called a masculine entity preceding the feminine entity. The first, the mashpia comes around and like wows you, and then because of that wow, you're willing to devote. So that devotion isn't stable. It was only a result. It's not reflectant of your true reality. Where on the other hand, if your willingness to devote, you're reaping first, you work hard, and only then you receive. So that becomes yours. That's be'emet. That's pnimius. And therefore, what comes of that is stable, is eternal. So that's called, again, so the other side where masculine and feminine entities appear in this allegory is in that result. That if my motivation is passing, it's unstable, so that's called a feminine motivation. Why? Because it's a motivation that later breeds lack of motivation. It's a changing state. It's like a mood swing. So that's called feminine. Women have more mood swings than men.
Is anybody getting insulted by this?
The
stability comes from being wowed by the masculine wow first.
That's what I said. That in the In the process, the masculine side is the problem, and in the result, the masculine side implies something good. It's just how the allegory is used.
Masculine allows you then.
If your process was a masculine process, then what you'll breed is a feminine result. And so in the process, femininity is good. It's implying a good thing. It's implying your willingness to work hard, like the receiving end's willingness to prepare himself or herself. Whereas in the result, so the term femininity implies the lack of stability, that it's something that breeds onwards. It's a redemption that has another exile. It's not an eternal redemption. That of this redemption will come an exile. So that's what Chazal say, that all of our redemptions until now from Babylon, from Egypt, they were all, because they were from above so much, they weren't, the people weren't prepared, they didn't proceed. So all of the light Hashem bestowed on us, we weren't really vessels for it, and therefore it lasted for as long as it lasted, but it wasn't eternal, and it gave birth to a new exile. Whereas the future redemption will be eternal. Now, why will it be eternal? So simply because it will come after a lot of preparation, and then we will, there has to be a lot of Nasev Nishma, 2,000 years of preparation, so that it will catch. So this is like a basic idiom in Torah and Chassidus.
So just bring in this piece that women are more stable than men, and when men marry women, then it brings them down, they're more up in the air. So isn't women more grounded?
I could say the opposite.
You can say the opposite? I thought that was
Sure.
always the known thing.
Okay, so you could say it that way. You could say it that way.
How can you say it the other way? Women are more grounded than men. Men are more up in the air.
Inherently, that's true, but usually in potential, it's the opposite.
In potential.
Because women are naturally grounded.
Okay.
But a man, if he initiates, he grounds himself, so he usually penetrates deeper. So there are two sides to it.
And how does that work with this, or doesn't it?
Like we're saying, that first, in the beginning of the process, we're saying that femininity is implying the willingness to prepare a lot and be like pnimi, which is the vessel for the lights to settle well. But in the end, we're saying that if you call the result feminine, then you're meaning that it's not stable. Because the term femininity implies opposite things in the allegory.
Is the feminine?
Like the femininity preceding the masculinity in the process is implying something good.
Right, something good.
But the result being called feminine is implying that it will give birth to exile. But it's not eternal.
But that's if the masculine comes first.
So in the process, it implies the opposite. Like the femininity in the process is implying something good, and the femininity in the result is implying something not good.
Okay.
That's why it's tricky. But
You need both.
You need both. That's why it says that if the femininity precedes the masculine side in the process, then you'll give birth to something masculine. So here it's the feminine is good, and here the masculine is good.
So you have to. That's why you're saying this whole thing about understanding.
Okay, so now.
First.
What's the word? This is the word from the Sikha from the Rebbe. That everything I just said, that's the Olam Hazeh. But when Mashiach comes, it'll be the opposite. Everything will turn over. What? That even though the masculine side will proceed, it'll birth masculine.
Oh, wait a minute.
That's the idiom.
It will proceed and birth?
Yeah, like the opposite of what we just said. But like everything we just discussed, that happening is dependent on working hard with the simple nature that we described at first. Again, just like we said about Naseh v'Nishma, how the second Nishma v'Naseh is a result of a profound Naseh v'Nishma. It's not a regression back to your first nature, it's a second nature. Same thing here. The ability, like if we say this like in simpler terms, like in general, if you're bestowed with something, and you haven't prepared yourself, it's not going to last. If you prepare yourself and then you're given, then that lasts. When Mashiach comes, we'll be able to capacitate a constant receiving, and it'll last, it'll stick, even though our preparation won't be proportionate.
Okay, so the constant receiving is the feminine part.
No, that's the masculine. The receiver is always receiving. Is always giving. It will be a constant. Hashem will be constantly granting. Like if today Hashem grants all the time, I don't have the appropriate preparation, so I won't be able to constitute all of that light. So today there has to be like a balance. That you read, first you have to prepare, and the more you prepare, the more you're capable to capacitate Hashem's blessing. And if you don't do that, then it won't stick. The blessing won't stick. Like Matan Torah, like that Hashem gave us a lot, infinite, but it didn't catch. We fell apart immediately. 40 days or however long we stood stuck.
All right, why
with
don't you just find me the feminine in this when the Mashiach comes, so I'll be happy.
So when Mashiach comes, it's all masculine. The
No,
entire idiom is masculine.
is that true?
Ish ve'ishu ladba. It says that the feminine entity will become itself masculine. That you could say it the opposite. It's described in other places the exact opposite. The femininity will become the true masculine. You could say it that way if that's more comfortable for you. Doesn't mean it's the exact same thing.
But that really is how it's described.
Sometimes it's described that the verse like there's a verse Nekeva Tesurev God. The feminine side will be the mashpia. Okay, the verse here is ish ve'ish yuladba. They'll both be man. You can say it that way, it's the same thing. There's no difference if you say it this way or say it that way. Here it's referring to this idiom, so it's using those phrases. Like if you're referring to the idiom where masculinity represents stability, like the resolve. So that's the chiddush here. The chiddush is that you'll be able to capacitate something that you're not a vessel for, like a constant. In light of what I just said, so if the mashpia is constantly giving without appropriate preparation, then you shouldn't be able to capacitate it. Right? That's how it should work. That's what we're saying here. That if you prepare yourself, then you can capacitate. If not, then no matter what I bestow upon you, you'll fall apart. It won't catch. So if that's the case, like our example was Matan Torah. The Jews came to Matan Torah, but they weren't prepared. They didn't work hard first. And all of the infinite, wonderful revelations we had there, again, they had an impact, but it was very temporary. Because the impact they had, that wow, like the example we said, you go to some concert or something, or some bring it, you come out with a wow, but it wasn't internalized well, and it very quickly it fades away. So that's relatively a masculine, like an imposed light, without a feminine preparation. And that's the nature today. So because that's the nature, if I only constantly bombard a person with lights, then it won't catch. You have to have avoided. Like you can see after Matan Torah. So there was a big revelation from Hashem to get us going. But then the more time goes by, Judaism became more and more settled. Why? To stress how much the purpose is that you prepare yourself more and more so that you can capacitate these lights.
Yes, the people that left Egypt were more prepared than anyone else. A lot of people didn't even leave. They did do some preparation and then.
Okay, so that's like you said, that in order to ignite the process, there has to be some wow. There's there are many paradoxes here. The one hand, you have to have there has to be some big wow to ignite the process. On the other hand, when you start with a big wow, it doesn't catch. So it gives you a push. No, but they were still here. So that's why there has to be so much back and forth between these two mentalities. Like all of our history is a constant back and forth. In the Torah, it's very clear. After 40 days, you go back and forth. And the more it became a deeper refining of the thinness of your soul. So it takes 2,000 years each time. And the revelation, like the external revelation of Matan Torah is the biggest. Even Beis HaMikdash isn't what you had in Matan Torah. And the second temple isn't the first temple. And the prophets aren't the second temple. And the tzaddikim aren't the prophets. Every generation, the external revelation becomes more internalized. But there's always a back and forth between the two. Even today, going to a class, you could say Hasidus is relatively very pnimi. Okay, but even in Hasidus, hearing a class like a wow class, so that's relatively bestowed upon you. And the motivation it awakens is not stable. But if you want to get a person to say, like, a person says, I want to understand the Yiddishkeit. So, so you have to learn Tanya for 25 years. You can't say that. So what do you say? You say, okay, I'll take you to an inspirational class. And then now, on the one hand, the inspiration you get through that class is not stable. But it's enough to start a process that will be stable. Okay, so that's the dynamic. Also, Matan Torah, it wasn't stable on the one hand. On the other hand, it ignited the process of the Jewish history. Slowly but surely refined itself to become something more and more stable. Now, there were a lot of like mashberim. Obviously, there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of falls. There's a lot of like each motivation that dwindles. I mean, those are like technical terms. If you translate that into life, it means that someone went through a very hard period of life. You were all up in the air, and now it's like manic depressive. So it's not just a technical phrase. Each dwindling in the Torah, so a lot of people died usually when that happened. Punishment or severity. One day he's still in Matan Torah, right? And Hashem revealed himself to all the Jews, and they reached the highest level of prophecy in existence. And 40 days later, they were all worshiping the calf, the golden calf, and then there was a punishment, and everything crashed, right? And then Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to the mountain for 40 days, and Hashem, and 80 days later, there's another Matan Torah. Yeah, not as wow as the first one, but more settled. But also relatively, obviously that was a big wow as well, relatively. Again, it also sticks as long as it sticks. So it's like an educator. Hashem takes 60 years to go. There's infinite patience to lead the Jewish people to a place where they can capacitate His light. And on the one hand, He's willing to bestow a lot in order to ignite your willingness to work. On the other hand, what that willingness, because it's a result of what He bestowed, is unstable. So you have to go back and forth constantly.
Did you use the 60 on purpose? Is it like 1/60 of death? Did you say 60 on purpose, or just take that number out of it?
No, I probably just threw it out. I don't think I meant that on purpose. Again, the periods grow, that's for sure. Like the first tilting from side to side was 40 days. Today, our exile has been going on for almost 2,000 years, right, since we had a revelation. Now, again, in microcosm, you can say that. We
haven't had a small revelation.
Okay, so again, so inside the process, you can find also in every person's private life. If you measure us as a nation, so it's like a very big chart. If you measure every person, you can say every day you go through such revelation.
We've had.
Right? And also as a people we've had. So again, there's like in any structure, there's infinite inter-inclusion. The dynamic is such that the more a person's preparation precedes the revelation, the more he can capacitate what he's given. Where on the other hand, the higher the revelation, the more willingness it ignites to prepare. So you have to constantly work with both sides.
We seem to go backwards, not just...
No, I disagree.
You don't think so?
No. I disagree.
That's
People just don't understand how being a believing Jew today is a phenomena that never existed. Like, because it's completely pneumius. It's got no connection to reality whatsoever. There's nothing going on.
Being a leading Jew.
Believing in Hashem today, in the way the world, like it's so pnimi today. Like we're so in the end of this process, where the external revelations are so minor, and the person's own work is so major. Like the feminine side is so important, and the masculine side is so minor that you could say that the previous generations, like if you look at, like you suggested, that the previous generations were doing better than us.
No, I didn't mean that.
Why could you say that? They meant they were maybe in a higher level, but if you take the dynamic I'm describing, then you'll see that the process is perfecting itself.
All the progress we make, we seem to just ditch it.
So that today there's a Jew who could say something like you just said, that I want to work, you want to serve Hashem, that you measure yourself in such a diameter of am I ditching it, am I not ditching it? That a person believes in, that a person believes in Hashem, he lives in light of Yiddishkeit today, is not depending on anything. There's nothing holding you in Yiddishkeit. There's no Matan Torah going on. There's no miraculous phenomena. Those based on Mikdash. There's no prophet standing on the corner and forcing you to do it. It's completely yours. Your faith. Every Jew today, his faith is relatively, again, everything's relative. It's relatively self-dependent because there's no masculine external revelation that's holding it, or there's virtually no masculine. And so again, so you could say maybe 30, even 30 years ago, which was not so different from the day, but the Rebbe did some ma'iftim, right? There was something to cling to. Today there's nothing to cling to. And so every Jew believing in Hashem in the world today is a self-contained phenomenon. There's no reason in the world. So even if a person's belief is such that he thinks that he doesn't believe and it bothers him, okay, why would that bother you? Any inkling of faith today is a self-contained existence. So that's higher than the previous generations, and that's the tachlis. Now, obviously, there's still what to perfect, or Mashiach would be here. So I'm not saying that but to understand why Chazal see the history as an ascending spiral, where, like you suggested, it could be very easy to see it the opposite. The previous generations were tzaddikim. How could you say that we're ascending? It's like the idiom the Rebbe used is it's like a midget on the shoulders of a giant. That if you measure me, like our generation, in of ourselves, then we're very, very small. But if you measure us in retrospective history, so we're standing very high.
Yes.
So what's the height of our generation? It's the internalization. How everything is pnimi. Now this is especially in the near history. So this is the epitome of Chassidus, what Chassidus came to do. And again, specifically Chabad. This exact relationship I said just now is the simplest word of how to understand the difference between general Chassidus and Chabad Chassidus. In general, I could say that just Chassidus is much more internalized than what preceded it. But within Chassidus, so Chabad is aspiring for, again, less wow and more internalization. And also in Chabad, every generation, you can see how it's more that way, more and more that way. Less and less wow, more and more internalization.
More internalized. You said general Hasidus is more internalized
than what preceded Hasidus. Than the faith, the preceded Hasidus in general. Everything always, this is where Hashem's leading. Hashem is coming into the world. So we're internalized. All of history is a process of internalization.
And Chabad Hasidus is even more so.
Right.
Yeah, and then also in Chabad, every generation is more so. So today, there's much less phenomena going on and much more capacitation. And so your Yiddishkeit is leaning on your processing of your faith as opposed to leaning on an external anchor infinitely more than your ancestors.
Well, we're leaning on you guys. We're leaning still on teachers.
Okay, so again, it says when Mashiach comes, there'll be no teachers, for instance, at all. Okay, so you could say that even today, there's still it's not Mashiach hasn't come yet, so there's still a high, but if you take this in relative to previous generations, So it's nothing. Like the gap between teachers and students today is nothing. It's just that it's so random that I'd be sitting here and you'd be sitting there.
Yeah.
But if you take like Moshe Rabbeinu, so okay, it's an immense gap. Even though you have to go to Moshe Rabbeinu, just take the Rebbe, one generation ago.
Right.
The gaps were so much larger. Okay, so the epitome of prophecy says that when Mashiach comes, there won't be this dynamic anymore. There won't be a teacher-student dynamic at all, because everybody will be atzmi.
That's what the Rebbe wanted.
No,
He made us all do us a
nachon. This is what Chabad's all about. Avoid v'koach atzmo.
Right.
So again, we're not there yet. So it's like in Chabad, you could say that even in the first generations, so they stressed much more everybody's learning of Chassidus and much less the tzaddik. Okay, but they didn't cancel the tzaddik. Also in Chabad there was a rebbe. The proportions of what was stressed were tilting in the direction of internalization, and that enhanced with every generation. So this is the same process we described initially as femininity and masculinity. That things start more outside of you, and they birth a motivation which is unstable, and then you use that to work hard, and then the next revelation you contain better, and you go back and forth your whole life. But again, the proportion is such that in order to internalize something, you have to first prepare yourself. Now, when Mashiach comes, so you'll be able to be the ability to capacitate won't be dependent on preparation.
Who's going to prepare themselves without some stimulation and motivation? Everyone needs motivation.
Well, no, that's what we're saying. When Mashiach comes, you won't need
Yeah,
preparation.
but what about in the middle? I mean, before that,
That's what you won't
I'm
need.
talking about before Mashiach.
Oh, no, okay, that's okay. Nachon, 100%. That's what also Hakadosh Baruch Hu. He gave us a big bang. You know. He said like it's not going to go anywhere if I don't come and sit on the mountain and blow the shofar.
So then why do you keep going back to first you have to prepare the vessel?
Because all of that was only a necessity so that you work.
The wow.
The wow is in order. It's means towards an end.
So it never comes that you prepare the vessel first. And
No, never comes. It's never.
Okay.
It's like in the most grand scale. So first Hashem decided to create the world on His own, right?
Okay.
So we didn't merit it. There was no work, and we didn't exist ourselves. But from then onwards, everything has to be done with a dynamic. So it always starts with the mashpia. But the mashpia's initial bestowing is only a catalyst to get you going. It's a word used in Hebrew, and it's definitely not Hebrew. So, yeah.
Okay. You don't know what that word is.
It ignites.
Catalyst.
It's a catalyst. Faster.
Catalyzer.
It's a catalyzer. So it's a catalyst that it gets you going, right? To lehatnia, the term is cute. To ignite, to get you going. So all the mashpia, kivyachol, even HaKadosh Baruch Hu, all he can do, right, per se, is give you a push, like a nudge. But then you have to move on your own. And if our purpose is to make you a vessel, to internalize Hashem into your reality, so kivyachol, Hashem can't do that on His own. He can get you going. But you have to, and when Mashiach comes, that's exactly what it says. What we're reading here is that will flip.
Why is that? That we won't need to, will capacitate without.
So the simplest way of phrasing it is like saying that there's a point break of refinement where there's no longer anything standing between you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we'll translate all of this into Naseh v'nishma v'naseh, right?
Mm-hmm.
So relatively, my willingness to devote before I understand, like Kabbalat all before understanding, is like feminine before masculine. And the more I'm willing to devote, the more I'm capable to capacitate. So that's saying that you have to precede Kabbalat all Naseh v'nishma to understanding. But as we said about these terms, the tachlis is the opposite. Where you reach a point that it becomes so natural for you that you identify. It's no longer, the Kabbalat Ol is no longer, it's like you reach a point of refinement. I think we said that there's something bad about Kabbalat Ol, that it's implying Hashem's distance from creation. Hashem's, not that it's counterintuitive and it demands a constant annulment of self, is implying Hashem not dwelling here naturally. Now, after enough willingness to devote yourself, the devotion becomes natural. So much so that the understanding precedes the devotion. There's a second devotion, a higher devotion. It's not a devotion opposed to my initial self. It's just an existential devotion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that sort of devotion is the result of understanding. It doesn't precede understanding. So again, you have to go through all stages. First, you have to rectify the lack of willingness, and that devotion is a pre-demanded requirement to reach understanding. And then once you reach understanding, then that itself breeds a new devotion, which is a result of understanding. So there's the devotion as a cause, and there's the devotion as a result. Completely, it's similar, but it's infinitely higher.
How do you rectify lack of motivation?
Again, so initially you rectify lack of motivation.
How?
With Kabbalat Ol, with an effort. You just counterintuitively force yourself. But again, the more you do that forcefulness enables you to internalize. You lack motivation because you don't understand what you're doing. But if you'll be willing to insist, even though you don't understand, then you'll merit understanding. So that's the Kabbalah, the Naaseh preceding the Nishma. Like telling, again, like the example we said before, like telling your friend, if you come for 25 years to the class, then you'll get it. If you don't, you don't. Which, like people mentioned here, is not a practical statement. Nobody really does that. First you say, come with me to this wonderful inspirational class. And then maybe you'll be convinced to devote yourself.
And you see how many of us do it. It is not something people want to do.
No, so there's a very little. That's what we're saying. That you have to have much more inspirational class. But if you have any chush whatsoever of what Chassidus is all about, so you despise these things. So there's like the inspirational type of classes, you despise them. They're a necessity. But so you have to find different people to do it for you, because it's maybe when you were younger, then you were willing. But it's not.
Because when you're younger, you don't think about it.
So maybe that means only like very few people, a handful of people will come to the class. But those are the only classes you're interested in giving. So how much can you, like when there's these shows going on in Binyanei Umah, so every year I have this thought. How do they do it? There are like 2 shows a day for like 4 days. So the guys need to get on stage. I've never done this, so I don't really know. And you have to be like inspirational twice a day for a week. How do you do that? Because it's so synthetic. So now they do it. It's like someone's job. No, to me, I got nothing against Adarba. It's very important, and the entire ability to later on, Bezrat Hashem, ignite an internal process is depending on these things. But it's a phenomenon to me. I don't understand how it can be done.
They enjoy it.
Okay.
They have the strength.
Right.
You gotta have
That's
the
their
strength.
talent. That's their talent.
Okay. What's that?
Is there a moment?
Like in Torat Hanefesh, very, very often. So I'm asked to give a certain course, and usually there's a morning group and an afternoon group. Now, just teaching the same class twice, I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
And it never comes out the same. I always get complaints at the end that people heard this class and that class, and it's like, wow, it's not the same. Why are you unfair with us? It's not b'chavana. It's not
You
purpose.
probably don't write a lesson plan. Your stuff comes down from Hashem.
each
Well,
time.
yeah, but the second part, but I don't write a lesson. I probably should write a lesson.
Right,
But,
that's what.
I don't. But no, but again, you give the same course. You have in mind what you're going to say. But when it comes out, it's like, if I were to give, I've noticed this, if I were to give a class twice, and try to be precise, I don't know how that happens, but it takes me like a quarter of the time. And you find yourself like 20 minutes into the class and you're done. Now, an hour ago, it took you an hour and a half to say something. But if you try repeating it, you can say it in 30 minutes. And I don't know how that works. It's like a phenomenal thing. I don't know how that
Because it's not coming.
Now, Bemet, I can count the points, and you can see you said all the points. No, it's just because when you say it the first time, you're Bemet, you're there. You're saying it as it comes. The second time, you're just repeating what was. So it's like going for a trip to Europe. So that could take 2 weeks. But you could tell me about it in a day. Wait, why? Because you didn't really do it. But you haven't been to Europe. It's not the same thing. The first class is real. It's authentic. In the second class, if you just repeat, so you're not really there. You're just saying what it's like to be there. Okay, so it's very nice, but like what? You wouldn't feel the same if I said, why do you have to spend so much money going to Europe? Well, let's do it here for a day. I'll just go through the rounds with you. You land, you walk here, you go there. That's it. Just pay me half the amount. No, I'll give you a trip to Europe. Nobody's going to do that. Right, because it's not MS. It's not, you haven't done anything.
Well, there you go. You just charge half.
Yeah, so now that's just twice a day, but doing the same thing every day. And it's also classes are somewhat informative. Like the inspirational part is minor. Like a performance. So the inspiration is everything. And how do they do it? How do they reproduce it every time? It's a phenomenon to me. But I have a Torat, but it's not so nice, so I'm not going to say. But and why did I mention all this? It was all just to describe these processes that he's saying. That's the general idea. That the dynamic today is such that the preparation has to precede the inspiration. And then the inspiration is internalized.
Did you just say?
Where on the other hand, there has to be like an initial inspiration to get things going.
When Mashiach comes, you said.
And when Mashiach comes, so it's just a constant inspiration.
It's a constant inspiration.
Now, how does that work? That's the chidush. That's what he's saying. That's the second nishma v'naseh. That you reach a point of refinement where the inspiration is no longer counterintuitive. It just sits, and then you can you can constantly funnel new light without any preparation because you're no longer in the way. This dynamic that we described is a necessity because of the bad in our souls. Because of the bad mixed in our souls, therefore, there has to be a preparation before every inspiration. Because Hashem's presence is countering something. There has to be like a refinement of the self before you can internalize. But there's a point of refinement where yourself no longer counters Hashem's presence. And then you can just constantly funnel inspiration. And this is the tachlis, this is Mashiach, and this is the tachlis of Chabad Hasidus. Now he says here in the brackets that this was the Seder Avodah of the Alter Rebbe. You were Erev Yotet Kisa. Because you understand who the Alter Rebbe is, what he wanted of everybody. So this is his Avodah Atzmit. This is his essential service. And that your understanding, your dveikus, your understanding precedes your devotion, which is not Jewish in today's terms. So that's why we're being precise. That this is not a regression from Naseh v'Nishma. This is on top of Naseh v'Nishma. There's so much Naseh v'Nishma that you reach a point that yourself no longer counters Hashem's presence. And then you funnel constantly.
You just answered the question.
You know what?
How you do the second class. You have to get out of the way.
Okay,
Countering Hashem's presence.
And in order to do that, you're probably going to have to start by working hard. How do you not work hard? It's like an easy question. How do you not work hard? So first you work very hard. A lot. The Alter Rebbe actually said that. What I just said now exactly. That once a Jew who was like a Apikoros, Yehudi Mumar, he just came to Alter Rebbe and he met him somehow and he said this to him. What do you want? We're both the same. That you do whatever you want. You want to learn Torah, you want to learn Chassidus, so you do whatever you want. I also do whatever I want. I want to drive on Shabbos, I want to eat pork. I do. We're the same thing. No purpose in nothing. It's just that to want what I want, you have to first not do everything you want. But you're right. That is exactly what we're saying here. How do you want? And first you have to do a lot of what you don't want. Like you have to, there is this, like there has to be a lot of Kabbalat all. And if there's so much Kabbalat all, so the all seeps in so much that it becomes you. It's no longer Kabbalat all. And this is Be'emes, the Tachlis of all of Chabad Chassid. It's called Mochin Be'etzem. Now what does this look like? So we'll read a few sentences inside. He says, so he says that this is because we're coming from learning one of his texts. So he says that this is what's reflected in this is page Memhei in the bottom
One whose texts?
of Reb Isaac from Homer. That's what we read
From who?
in the
From
previous
where?
page. Reb Isaac Homer, this is the city Homer. So he was the chassid whose Maimer we studied. And he's the biggest mind in Chabad.
Isaac.
And in brackets, he was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. In brackets, he says that the Ken Hayatzad Mor Zaken. Obviously, he got this from the Alter Rebbe. He didn't make it up. So this is what Rabbi Isaac was trying to say in his Maimer, and this is how the Alter Rebbe saw things. So what's the void here? In preceding understanding to devotion. So this is the epitome of the service of Hashem. And all of today's need to precede devotion to understanding is only in preparation to this higher level where understanding precedes devotion. And that was the Alter Rebbe's level, Rabbi Isaac's level. This is what Chabad wants of everybody. So and he says a nice word here. שבזה נשמע בחמימות ההתפעלות המידות שבלב עניין הקרירות שבמוחין בעצם. So what comes of this? That in the burning of the heart, it's all contained and settled in the coolness of the mind. This is like the picture of a Chabad chassid. The heart's burning within, but it's not. There's no chitzonius whatsoever. It's all contained. So if you proceed the understanding to the heart, then what you get is a mindful excitement. If you proceed the heart to the mind, then what you get is an excited understanding. This is the difference between Chabad Chassidus and the general Chassidus. Both things are Ktusha, like mamash, very good. But the Alter Rebbe, his entire aspiration, his entire path, was looking to breed a mindful excitement as opposed to an excited understanding. Why? Because the mindful excitement is implying that Hashem's presence is natural. That's the tachlis. It's not cold. It's not castrated. It's excited, very excited. But the beauty and the wow is all a given. It's natural. It's the simple nature of reality that Hashem is everything. As opposed to such a revelation being like excited. Wherever every time you understand that you're blown away, which is implying that Hashem's presence is not settled. So Mashiach is taking all of that presence and settling it in the world and in the person's heart that appears as like the Alter Rebbe's mindful excitement. All of the beauty, all the wonders, this is everything Hashem becomes pshita, like pashut. Not taken for granted, but settled well settled. If it's taken for granted, it's not exciting. I'm not saying it's not exciting, it's a settled excitement. We've said many examples for this in the previous classes. Like something you've internalized very well, and the method's very wondrous to you, but it's no longer counterintuitive. It's not, it's wow, but it's a settled wow. And this is the entire tachlis of Chassidus. So this is relatively a very masculine thing. So Yachassit, for women, it could be a little bit more wow and less subtle.
What?
Yachassit. Relatively. So that's the word here.
So women, even in a more settled state, it's still going to be more wow.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Good to know. So I have to answer your question.
No,
Masha'in can, we'll finish the paragraph.
Yes, because let's talk about this.
I wouldn't say they'll be less settled. I'd say that the women would, like when Mashiach comes, everybody's going to be like this. It's all going to be settled. But still, women would be relating more to the wow and men more to the settlement. It's all settled. Still, there's someone who is more connected to the wow side, someone's more connected to the settled side. Okay, what impresses you more? The presence of Hashem, or that it's settled? So there's someone who's still like wowed by Hashem's presence, and there's someone who's more connected. That could be settled is more impressive than the presence itself. The Giluya Atzmut or the Diraba Tachtani. Which side are you? So again, it's a run and return also.
Okay, so just, you think that after 23 years, I lived in it for 23 years, that I'd be settled, that I'm still wow.
I wouldn't think that.
Oh, really? Okay, so I still feel well, I get to live here,
Okay.
but
it's
think I
settled.
should seem more settled,
Yeah, I'm sure it's more settled.
although I'm more settled than I need.
I'm sure
People
you're.
that just moved here.
And you're also more settled than when you got off the boat.
Oh, yeah, right.
But
Okay,
are you less wow?
but I'm still wow.
That's called a settled Ritzion. Very good.
It's what called what?
It's called a settled wow. It's not, again, if you're chilled, like castrated, that's bad. That's klipa. It's amalek.
Okay.
If
that's
you're
not
just
what
indifferent.
masculine is. Masculine.
No.
What's
Again,
masculine?
that's just that's
What's
a regression
masculine?
to the first
What's
nature.
masculine then?
That it's settled.
Just settled.
Yeah, masculine. Yeah, it's stable. Now, I'll give you another example. Why is that called masculine here? Because when you were fresh off the boat, if something bad happened, it would undermine your well. And today, it won't. Not completely, but you could go from one side to the other. Like you could have a rough day, and your rough day would be like in counter to your well. Now, the more it's settled, the less anything can fluctuate. It's not fluctuable. Why? Because even simply, just historically, because it's all taken in proportion, and there's a much larger proportion. So it's settled, it's stable. That's the masculine idiom. It doesn't waver. So this is what he says here now. Masha'in ken. This is Latid level. It's like a messianic mentality. Masha'in ken. I passed the page. We skipped all the brackets, and we're on page 46. After a little bit here. Masha'in ken lefi haseder hashaveh lekol nefesh ba'alma hadein. In our world, what's demanded of every person is to first serve Hashem in the orthodox manner of preceding the devotion to the understanding. So what comes of that? What comes of that is that every time you understand something, like godliness, you catch some godliness, it blows you away. It's excited. It's an excited understanding. That's how it feels today in our world. Whereas the Alter Rebbe's service was the opposite. It was a settled excitement. In our service, what's demanded of everybody is to reach a excited understanding. And the more you do that, the more it settles, slowly but surely.
I mean, you have to go through that.
Yeah, you have to go, exactly. So you have to go from the bottom up.
Mm.
לפי הסדר מלמטה למעלה, from the bottom up.
And an excited understanding sounds like from the top down.
No.
Excited,
No, the excited is because it's countering your intuition. That's the excitement. It's like a surprise.
okay. So that's what.
It's because you come from your reality.
Okay,
And
so
Hashem's presence is always wow.
that's
So a non-settled wow
is like now.
is like now.
Okay,
But if you do that enough, Be'ezrat Hashem, it'll settle. That's Mashiach.
okay.
מה שאין כן לעתיד לבוא, אור חדש על ציון תאיר דווקא. And in order to bring this revelation, so we have to somewhat serve Hashem this way today as well. We have to aspire to this consciousness in the end of exile, and that itself is what brings Mashiach. And this is Mashiach, and doing this is bringing Mashiach, being that way. We mentioned in the beginning. Yeah. Serving Hashem this way today, even though it's not typical of exile, is what will bring us out of exile. It's, like the Rebbe said, in the end of the Galus, you have to start living Mashiach already. So that's pretty much the whole paragraph here. So that's, we're almost done. We have a few lines left. Bezrat Hashem. Let's see there. Yeah, but it sounded pretty subtle.
No, because
So that's good. Baruch Hashem.
it's like